Okay, welcome back. I'm Justin Perkins. This is Talk Junkie, and this is part two. We're talking about how things just really aren't that bad. Uh, and again, I've had this discussion. I've made posts about this on social media. I've had this type of discussion with people. Um, it's it's generally not received very well, and I don't know why. A lot of people, it's a religious thing. I guess something related to their religious beliefs dictates a need for the world to be in worse shape than it's in. Due to it being the end times and the world's ending and things of that nature. So I get a lot of flack on that end. Religious people, sometimes people of certain denomination belief and certain religious belief, mainly certain denominations of Christian faith, are very adamant that the world is worsening and that it's almost time for the world to end. So I get that quite often, and then also it really depends on who's in office um, to when you have the conversation because if one party's in office, the opposing party usually has a fairly doom and gloom outlook for the future of humanity and the world as we know it. So you've got that aspect as well. And so when I thought about doing a podcast episode about it, I thought, well, present some data and hopefully generate some conversation, if nothing else. I thought that it would be good for that. So we looked at a lot of different things in the last episode. We looked at infant mortality, child labor, hunger, vacation time, food cost, all that good stuff. I think death and childbirth. Again, if you're looking for some of the various, I didn't write down links. I do this in between a full-time job, a family, and other things. I do the research, and I can't have my phone up because I'm currently recording on my phone to look at things live while I do this. If I've got a laptop in front of me, I can generally do that. I don't because I don't have internet connection at this point in time in the area I'm in. So I had to take these notes and do it as quickly as possible to try to get the information down. But I do have the sources of the data. Our World data, the CDC, Gallup polls, International Food Policy Research Institute, International Labor Organization, USDA, and UNICEF are the main places I pulled this information from. We went through all that stuff last time, and on the health side of things, to me, I think this is an indicator of progress. And I pulled up a thing that listed, I think it was, I'm sorry, I can't remember, maybe top 10, top 20 things that show improvement in the world, and this was on that list. Almost all these things were on that list, along with a lot of the information. But to me, this is progress. I used to be a smoker. I know a lot of people who do or have. And, there's no doubt that the carcinogens that were in cigarettes and the addictiveness of the nicotine and the cost of the cigarettes themselves, the effect on children who were exposed to the smoke and stuff and secondhand smoke. I've seen, in all honesty, if we're being fair, I've seen information both ways on that. But either way, it's hard to believe that there's anything good about that. And smoking, according to a Gallup poll, smoking is down tremendously. This is actually over quite a long span of various polls. In 1955, when polled, 45% of the Americans polled smoked weekly. It's not to say how much, but they smoked weekly. That's 45% of the people polled. In 2014, it was down to 21%. That's a fairly significant drop from 1955 to 2014. But just 4 years later, in 2018, after being polled again, it had dropped down to 16%. So there's a fairly significant drop in smokers from 2014 to 2018, and a substantial amount of percentage of these people polled from 55 to 18. Of course, in 55, you were still in an era where doctors were recommending it, cartoons were doing advertisements for it. It was such a part of American culture that it wasn't viewed as being dangerous, bad, or anything of that manner. So it's easy to understand how those numbers could be so high, and that's just the United States, and that's just people polled. It's hard to get a true representation. I'm a fan of older movies and things of that nature. Watch something like The Twilight Zone, and it'll tell you a lot of things about culture at that time. A small thing that I found odd: almost every story starts out telling the age, often, of the person. In almost every male, the story is about 35 to 36, even though it's clearly either being portrayed by a fairly older man. I've never went and checked the ages of these actors during the time of the filming, or 35 and 36 looked a lot different back then than it does now. I would lean more towards the first option. But in watching those shows, smoking is so prevalent. Johnny Carson used to smoke on live TV. Smoking was so common and so accepted all the way up into the 80s and 90s that it had taken over movie and pop culture and things of that nature. And now I really believe, especially as Americans, this health kick, this desire to do better and be better is outweighing a lot of the other things going on health-wise in the country. And I think that's why you're seeing this decline in smoking. And why is that relative to the world being a better place? Because it helps in a lot of factors. It helps in regards to health globally. If the numbers go down globally, now there was a part in that report, and I honestly did not write it down, but I believe it was some developing countries are still having a real hard time with cigarette use, and it may have even been growing in some of those countries. But you could easily go back and check that. But in regards to it improving health, there's also, on a certain level, it's improving, the environment. I mean, cigarette butts get put everywhere, and from forest fires to pollution of wildlife areas to massive amounts that get blown into storm drains into the ocean. Cigarettes, it's hurt an industry. It's hurt people as far as income, these farmers and stuff. But the good has far outweighed the bad in the loss of cigarette smoking. And I do think that is definitely an influence on being a positive for our country, and I think it will be globally. And I really feel that, and that's why I threw it in. And apparently, whoever made this list, which is one of the lists I went off of, felt the same way. To me, one thing that we think of a lot of times when we think of problems in the world is violence. And one thing I hear constantly from two different groups, people who were alive during the 50s and 60s will say that was the greatest era in the United States. Of course, that's predominantly white individuals that were born during that time. You'd have to have a different outlook if you were African American. For whatever reason, they truly feel this way, and I've never understood it, because to me, I feel like we're in a lot better place in so many avenues. But feeling safe is very important to people. And upon doing some research for this, I think I can kind of put my finger on why older white Americans feel that the 50s and 60s, especially the 50s, were the best time to be alive. Looking at a lot of these, especially as it pertains to America, looking at violence in America, a lot of the tables and charts and stuff I'm looking at start in the 50s and 60s. and the the homicide rates are low. They went down from, because you look at a lot of these look per capita, a lot of these look per thousand people, but if you take a smaller population, but you've got a higher violence rate, say something an area in the West, an area that lay right in a military town out west where you had cavalry and you had Native Americans and you had criminals and things of that nature, you're going to have a much higher rate, and that drops going into the 50s and 60s, and so you have a lowering, even though you're having a population increase. And again, feeling safe adds a lot of value to your life, and I think that is where this issue of people saying it was such a great time comes in. Because if we look at long-term homicide rates worldwide have fallen dramatically, and that's via our world data. You've got a dramatic decrease. They've got a great chart on this. You've got this massive decrease. Now, if you step back and look at the U.S., the short term in the U.S. over the last couple of decades, from the 80s to now, shows a decrease. But that's because the homicide rates had spiked in the 80s. See, they had spiked, they rose substantially from the 50s and 60s up to the 80s, and now, in regards to assault deaths, they spike in the 80s, and now they're on a downshift back down. So it's getting better. But we did hit this point in the 80s, probably around the time of the war on drugs, the introduction of crack cocaine, and it becoming predominant. A lot of different things. We have this large spike in the 80s. The U.S. violent crime rate from 1960 to 2014 has shown a sharp increase, peaking in the 80s and then dropping substantially. So that's assault deaths and violent crime rates and homicide rates all show that same thing, starting in the 50s and 60s with these low rates, spiking in and around the 80s, and then decreasing again. So worldwide, they're having a predominant drop, especially because they're taking into effect, they're going much further back. They're going back into the 1700s. I believe one chart went back to the 1770s in England, and this homicide rate has dropped over time. I believe they're factoring in the increase in population or something of that effect, or it could be one death per 1,000 or whatever it is, or deaths per 1,000 or per 10,000 people. But regardless, you've got this long-term fall, a dramatic fall worldwide. But in the U.S., we hit this spike in the 80s, and we are on the decline again. So that's a good thing. That's a good sign. That's a positive. Excuse me. That's proof the world is getting better in those regards. But it is an indicator that we have an issue. We definitely had an issue in the 80s, and apparently we've remedied that. And if you go back and look at crime rates, murder rates, rape, all those things in regards to New York City in the 70s as compared to now, it's a tremendous drop. And that seems to be pretty consistent throughout. The thing that I find odd, it's very hard, and again, I was trying to do this quickly, but I did find a lot of discrepancies trying to locate these types of numbers. Is Chicago in the 70s and 80s as compared to the south side of Chicago now? And I may have been looking wrong, but that's something I'd like to go back and look at. But there's some statements out there that Chicago's death rate compared to Iraq's, and all this. I see some numbers that, some that are misleading, but some seem fairly accurate. That's highly possible, and that again reflects on, even though that's was a war zone at one point in time, it no longer is. But it's a very delicate situation that is very dangerous now. That's hard to define as a war, but that is kind of indicative of where we are. Even though it's a first world country, our violence is still out there. And if you look at cities with gun laws, and there's so much. Chicago has some of the strictest gun laws in the world. Has some of the most of the highest gun crimes. On the other hand, you've got some surrounding areas and states who have no, basically very lax gun laws, but you also have a lot of illegal guns coming in. Um, our flow of illegal guns into the United States, it seems to be far more of an issue. Or flow of illegal guns in the U.S. I don't necessarily know that these are being imported. It doesn't say that they're being imported, but um, our legal guns are not seeming to be an issue. I believe legal gun wise, or some, again, I wasn't planning on bringing this into the conversation, but I may go back and look at some point at the actual number of gun ownership in Canada, the actual number of guns per household. If you take into account the difference in population, those numbers are higher, but they have a much less rate of gun crimes. So, but the homicide rates globally being down is a prime example of good in the world. And we're making progress in the U.S., and that's very important. It's indicative of growth, and that's important that we're making that growth. Education is so important across the scope of things. In free democratic societies, the opportunity for education is higher, and so education is more predominant, and literacy is much lower. If we look at the United States in a bubble, we don't associate the United States with child labor, but we had it. We don't associate the United States sometimes with the mass starvation levels like you had in Africa and stuff, but especially during the Depression and things like that, we've had starvation issues. We've had all these issues, slavery, civil rights issues. We've had all these issues that other countries have had, and we have gotten by them. And one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the factors I truly believe is education. It's much easier to control a less educated population. It just is. The more educated and the more learned a society, the more likely they are to be free. And education is often restricted for that reason. And it's education as a whole on all levels, the arts, humanities. You'll take communist countries, even who, like China, who want their citizens to excel at math, science, things of that nature. But if you can restrict philosophy, history, expression, art, then that's a very important part of education. And if you can restrict those things, it's easier to control those people. Even here in the United States, there was a point in time where it was very common, especially in my area, in eastern Kentucky, probably, I would say in my great-grandfather's age, even my grandfather's age, for a lot of people to go through 4th, 5th grade, and 6th grade, and that'd be a high education. For a predominantly large group of those people to not do high school. And you move even further back, what was the quality of education when you had every grade in one room in a one-room school, and you were so isolated inside these mountains, and the same going out west, and the growth of education and the continuing of education into later years, it coincides hand in hand with our progress. And I think it was world data showed people are going to school globally more often and for longer period of times, which obviously means that literacy worldwide is up. That that is a huge thing, and it's probably one of the largest factors in the improvement of the world globally. Is the opportunity to learn is there, the ability to learn is there, and they result in a more learned, more intelligent, more compassionate, more free thinking person. And that results in better people in our world. Um, you know, the significance of that is hard to measure. It's hard to weigh. Um, it really is. Uh, I don't know if a part of me just wants the world to be so great because I want my kids to live in a great world, and I want them to make that world even better, and their kids to make that world even better. I don't know. We have issues. We have relation issues uh, on a global level. Obviously war and things of that nature have not went away. That should be something, even though there are less nuclear weapons, and there's been a downsizing of nuclear weapons vastly over the last couple decades. Um, still we still go to war. We still have fears. We still have fears of nuclear war. Um, and war is something we need to work on. There's so many things globally we need to work on. A lot of the problem for us here in the United States is there's a lot in the United States we need to work on, and sometimes our efforts government-wise and our efforts politically and even socially sometimes seem to be directed more towards going outside of our country, and I feel that that's played a huge part in the growth of the world, and I feel that that's important. But I've always felt this is the most, this is the simplest, most broke down version of this I could give you. But let's say there's an old lady who lives next door. She can't do anything for herself. She's at a point that she doesn't even have to be an old lady. That's a young child. It can't do anything for itself, and it's struggling. It can make it, but it can barely make it. Now you've got a broken arm, and you've got two options. Take a couple months to heal that arm and help what you can in that time, or perpetually re-injure that arm, helping the neighbor. Now, winter comes, times get rough. You've not put back the firewood you'd normally put back. You've been getting firewood for both, and your arm's out. You've not caught the food you'd normally catch for both, or even for yourself. You've not done all these things to prepare yourself for the winter that you would normally do. Now, halfway through the winter, you're both struggling. Independent of each other and together, you're both struggling, without the ability or capacity to help one another. If before winter had come, if you'd have went to that neighbor and put a little more on their plate, let them pull a little more weight while you were recovering, if you'd have healed yourself and took care of yourself and got yourself in a position to make it through the winter, if nothing else, you could have shared your success through the winter. But instead you brought both of you down. If we as a country don't look at these issues we have and fix them, we can fix them and reach out. But we have to reach out less while we're fixing them. But if we can fix those, our ability to reach out rises substantially. It's amazing what this country could do at full potential, at full health. If we don't do that, if we don't take the time to work with our homeless, if we don't take the time to fix our legal system and our prison system, if we don't take the time to better our food and fix our food, if we don't take the time to work on violence in our cities, if we don't take the time to attack poverty in the places that poverty has become predominant, if we don't work on our infrastructure, bettering our education, if we don't work on our political system and controlling it as a people and not as parties, if we don't do these things, we may not be part of the better that the world is becoming. We take for granted, because we are the United States of America, we are the greatest nation in the history of the world, and I truly believe that. That could be arrogance on my part, that could be a lot of things, but I believe the numbers speak for themselves, and I truly believe that. I also know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that nothing is stopping us from falling off that pedestal and falling off that place and becoming just another statistic, just another country, while someone else takes over leading the world. Now, that country could be a good influence, it could be a bad influence. We will have no say on that. Because if the foundation of the structure is weak, anything you build onto that structure, anything that tries to shed its weight and help have that structure help share its weight, will fall. I believe the world's getting much better. I believe our country is getting much better. I believe it has to be a concentrated effort, a group effort, and it has to be something globally and for us nationally that is of the utmost importance. And we show a value. We show children a value. We show organizations a value. We show companies a value. We show political parties a value in improving life for Americans and for the rest of the world. And I feel that as a race, humans have done an amazing job at adapting and growing. The definition for intelligent life varies across the board. But one that's been agreed on in the past is that intelligent life is dictated by a life that has the ability to manipulate its surroundings, its environment. We consider ourselves more intelligent than dolphins because dolphins do not possess the ability to manipulate their environment. Manipulating your environment in a negative fashion can be a sign of a lack of intelligence. Maybe not the right marker to look for as we look for life out in space and as we regard life here. But the ability to affect your surroundings in a positive manner. I don't know that there's any greater indication of value and intelligence as a species, as a race, as anything. I believe humans throughout the universe are unique and special because we have the ability to impact our environment for the good. We've done so in the past. We've done a lot of negative, but we've done a lot of that in ignorance. And ignorance may not be an excuse, especially, it can't be an excuse once we know better. But until we know better, we can still plead ignorance. We know better in a lot of cases now. So we have the ability to do better. And we need to start doing better. But I'm highly, highly optimistic about how good we are doing. It's easy to focus on those negatives. It's easy to emphasize those negatives. We are losing a certain amount of our free speech. Nothing like Canada is. We have the ability to stop that. Canada has the ability to stop that. We have the ability to lead by example. We talk about the rights of people in communist countries or people in totalitarian ruled regimes that are being silenced. Homosexuals in Iran being thrown off of buildings and being forced into to have surgeries to change gender and have gender reassignment. We look at students. Look at Tiananmen Square. Things of that nature. We seem to hurt for these people who don't have a voice. We're allowing our voice to be taken. People will honestly find offense in me saying that the world is good, and they will attack that. And if I was anybody with any kind of voice to amount to anything, it'd be harder for me to say what I've said than it is for me being a nobody that probably 10 or 12 people are listening to. because the fear is real. But if we keep ourselves free and we keep our freedom and our ability to speak up and speak against things, then we keep our minds free and our thoughts free and the ability to think and function freely and independently, then we can have a positive impact on things. And again, I do think the world is getting better. There are some things, however, that are getting worse. And in fairness, we've got to touch on those things and eventually do a podcast on those things. I feel like if I just do all of this at once, then it just bleeds together and you're null and void. But if I don't mention it, it's not being fair. Gun violence is definitely an issue, especially in the United States of America. Trafficking, although human trafficking and sex trafficking stuff has went down in areas, it's spiked in other areas, there is still room for concern, and there's places in which it's growing in opposition to places in which it's become non-existent. But modern slavery is still in existence, and that's inexcusable. Hunger in America on an American level, and that affects the global level, is ridiculous. It's completely there's no way it reasonably can exist. No way whatsoever. Children not receiving health care. There's no way that can reasonably exist through any part of any thing even resembling a modern society. There's going to be places hard to get to, hard to touch that are going to still experience those things, but we can work together and prevent that. Pollution, look, pollution is one of those things that's, I done the episode on black and white and things that are mostly gray. When it comes to information on pollution, it's mostly gray because you can't find the gray information. All you can find is the black and white. You have people that die hard want to say that we're not polluting as much as we were. And you want to find people that die hard say we're polluting more. We obviously make more, consume more, and dispose of more. So to some degree, regardless of what the parameters are and how you're viewing the information, we have to be doing some damage, and probably at a higher scale. But that could easily be changed, and that could be fixed, and that takes time. It takes people not being selfish and people wanting to make a change in things. But that is a negative that is affecting the world. Terrorism is probably not as predominant in everything I looked at, and it was almost put into this, but I felt like it was being a little, disrespectful in a lot of ways. Even though a lot of the numbers show terrorism is down, terrorism is still very prevalent, and it is still one of the parts of the world that needs improvement. Even though statistically it's going down, in a lot of regions it statistically is increasing. Natural disasters and natural disaster relief. Natural disasters are something that, regardless of if we caused it, and again, data's out on that. You can't get a definitive on that. Regardless or not if we caused it, it's something we can't affect at this point either way. It's not something we can do something about. But different types of natural disasters are becoming more prevalent in other areas that they've not been really an issue in before. That is true. But on the positive side of that, natural disasters as a whole, we seem to be in a pretty calm time. But the Earth seems also to go in cycles. Same way with a lot of things. It's hard to tell. So, some natural disasters have diminished. I could put that on as being a positive, but if I want to be fair and you want to be transparent, you want to be honest, still the massive amount of these things, and them like wildfires and things of that nature, were more than likely, a lot of the science I'm looking at in unoccupied areas were more frequent in the past. Actually, we've become better at controlling the surroundings, but we've also done a lot more damage to these surroundings in the process. So it's one of those things. It's hard to make a determination on. I definitely wouldn't say that with the magnitude of these wildfires in the way that they're affecting populated areas, even though there may be a decrease in them, because wildfires actually help burn off this material in smaller fires that would not allow for these large fires. So we're definitely causing the larger fires in some regards in some areas, but also temperature change is doing that. But a lot of the things I found were a mixed bag, and if you're going to be fair and you're going to be honest, you can't throw those in. And in a lot of them, even though you may be able to go one way or the other, they're still very much a negative. And that's one of those things that are still very much a negative is environmental impacts. The commercial fishing industry and what we've done to the ocean, that is a huge negative. And that's one of the things about the world that's not great. So there's a lot of things that are great. There's a lot that need a lot of repair, need a lot of work. In all fairness, numbers can be manipulated, statistics can be worded and molded and shaped into anything you want. But when you really look at it, we're much more fortunate than those who came before us. And if we do better and work harder, we can continue to be more fortunate, and we can allow for the generations to come after us to be even more fortunate than us. I knocked that out in 2 parts, and I'm really surprised. I did not think I was going to be able to do that. No ads, no reads or anything like that today. Any ads you hear in this one will come at the beginning or end, and there'll be the national ads from Spreaker. I'm not going to stick anything on this. If you took the time to listen to both these episodes, I really appreciate it. I really would like any type of input on any of them. I do them because I enjoy doing them, and I hope somebody else gets some enjoyment out of them. If you want to email me, it's authorjperk, P-E-R-K, @gmail.com. You can go to Jay Perkins' YouTube page, and this will be there in YouTube version. And you can listen to it there, watch it, and listen to it however you want to look at it. There's no video to it. There are some videos there, though. I do videos occasionally. But leave a comment there. You can contact me through Author J. Perkins' Facebook page through Messenger. You cannot get to me on the page. I'm not on the page very often. Or you can find this on Spreaker. If you're listening to it somewhere else, you can find it on Amazon or Google Play. You can find it on iTunes. Leave a review, leave a comment, leave something wherever you can leave it at. It means a lot to me because I read it and I go, I'm not, the numbers of downloads and things of that nature are enough to keep me wanting to do it. But it does feel good, when someone reaches out and communicates with you. It's a good feeling. But thank you very much for your time. It means a lot to me that anybody gives me their time. And the world ain't so bad. Have a great day.